Businessmen, Lawyers and Justice Mark Easton, January 9, 2013. Reproduced by anarchist probation officer. The simple fact that most prisoners come out of jail and reoffend is the government's central justification for dismantling the state-provided probation service in England and Wales. The hard part is putting something else in its place that will work better. The Justice Secretary Chris Grayling is determined to cut recidivism, but he wants to save money at the same time. His answer is, effectively, to privatise probation. All but the highest risk offenders will be managed by non-state providers. The government talks about private and voluntary sector bodies running the 16 contracts, but few charitable organizations have the capital reserves or expertise to win the tendering process. There will be a role for not-for-profit bodies in frontline delivery of some services, but it looks almost certain that the people in charge will be hard-headed businessmen out to make the return. The Ministry of Justice is convinced that the profit motive will deliver a cheaper and more efficient service. Critics argue it will lead to confusion, waste and risk. Companies like Serco and G4S, which already advertise their willingness to expand into the probation sector, are frontrunners for the contracts, a prospect which naturally alarms the 20,000 people employed by the state-run service at the moment. It is thought that around 14,000 probation officers may lose their state-funded jobs. Many will be re-employed by the private providers, but, since one of the key aims of the reform is to save money, a significant number will not. It is no surprise that the National Association of Probation Officers, the union for the sector, say the government's motives are purely ideological and warn that if this plan proceeds it will be chaotic and will compromise public protection. The association's influence, indeed its very existence, is threatened by the reforms. What, though, is one to make of the predictions of chaos and public risk? Similar arguments were put forward when the Labour government privatized prisons and introduced payment by results in other public services like the NHS. Indeed, the concept of contestability market competition was inserted into the DNA of the National Offender Management Service when it was being created almost a decade ago. The sky did not fall in. The public risk argument comes down to this: if you have low-medium risk offenders being managed by the private/voluntary sector and high-risk offenders by the state sector, there will be confusion and error because risk is dynamic. A survey of probation cases in London has suggested that 24% see a change to their risk status while under supervision. Most, of course, see their assessment go down. But some may suddenly be identified as a much greater risk than originally thought. The man jailed for reckless driving, a low risk at the outset, may emerge as someone who presents serious risk of domestic violence. How easy will it be for that person to be moved from the non-state provided service back into state supervision? Here lies the conundrum. The government insists that the new streamlined state-run probation service must not be constantly looking over the shoulder of the contract providers. Equally, they say the state-run service must have oversight of all cases. Where is the line drawn? Get it wrong, and confusion and risk increase. The Ministry of Justice stresses that a lot of the detail is still to be worked out. Many of the challenges will be dealt with in the construction of the contracts. But, as ever, the devil will be in the detail. Putting together payment by results contracts often proves much more complex than originally planned. For example, an operation where Serco and the existing state-run London Probation Trust jointly provide community payback services for the MOJ took around 2 years to procure. One big headache is defining the result for which payment will be made. In the context of probation, how much reward, if any, should a contractor get if an offender with a history of violent crime commits no offenses of violence while supervised, but steals a chocolate bar from Tesco's? There is also a concern that private providers might maximize profits by focusing on the less challenging cases. Offenders with complex needs may require high levels of investment which don't make business sense. The contract is key in addressing such questions. So the most important people in deciding whether these proposals work will not be politicians, nor will they be businessmen, probation officers or voluntary sector mentors. Success or failure will be in the hands of contract lawyers.
The first thing to say very clearly is that those offenders who represent a threat to the public, people who might go out and commit a serious violent crime tomorrow or who it develop, as things develop, look likely to do so, will, as they are today, continue to be supervised by highly qualified probation professionals. But what I'm trying to do is to create an environment where we deliver much better support to people both in prison and out of prison. You heard in that report that very often people walk out of the front door of a prison, £46 in their pocket, get either no support at all, or maybe an appointment with the probation service in a few days' time. I want them to be met at the prison gate. I want the mentor who's meeting them to have sorted out where they're going to be living. I want them to be going straight on to a new rehab course if that's what they need, or into a college course if they dropped out of school and not had previous education. So actually we start to help them get their lives back together again. When I've talked to people who've come out of prison, very often I have them say, look, I didn't know how to sort my life out. And in that situation it's very easy to return to a life of crime.
Yeah, well, obviously, but surely you could put that in the hands of the probation service and just say, we'd like you to do this as well.
Well, what I want to do is I want to capture the skills that exist across the public, private and voluntary sectors. So we need the private sector management skills that will make the system work effectively. I want the voluntary sector mentoring skills, often a former offender who look after those young offenders when they come out of prison. I don't think there's anybody better placed than the old lag who's gone straight in helping young prisoners coming out of prison to make sure they don't go back there. And you'll find there's real expertise in the voluntary sector in doing that. And I want to capture that and bring that to bear to tackle reoffending. And alongside that, I want the public sector professionals to continue to do what they do best, which is to protect society against a serious risk of harm.
But there are charities, obviously, who've been doing some of that work already. Why do you need to give them the duties of the existing probation officers as well?
Well, the charities are very keen to expand what they do. You'll find very good work taking place across the criminal justice system on a limited basis by the charitable sector. Surely we can capture a bit more of that and bring those skills to bear to try and make sure we have more of an impact on the really high levels of reoffending that we have.
But is a bit more, I mean, they want to do a bit more and they want to expand, and that makes sense, but to give them the responsibility for such a vast number of ex-prisoners so soon and so fast, is that not giving them more responsibility than they can handle?
Well, I think it's about making sure that we harness the best of public, private and voluntary sectors so that we've got all the best skills that we can bring to bear on what is a huge social problem. We have half the people who go to our prisons reoffend within a year of leaving prison. That's got to change.